Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Imagine this. You've had one of those incredibly demanding days. You finally get home, it's late, and you sit down for what feels like your first proper meal. Or maybe, you're just a natural night owl and your eating schedule just naturally shifts later. We often pour so much thought into what we eat: organic, low carb, high protein. But what if when you eat is actually just as vital for your health, particularly your metabolism?
It's a really profound question, and one that cutting-edge science is truly beginning to illuminate. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a groundbreaking study that directly confronts this: how eating late in your day might impact your glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity. And here's where it gets even more compelling. It also uncovers the surprising genetic influences on our eating habits.
Right. So our mission for you today is to really distill the most important insights from this significant new research. We've pulled key details from a recent health news article, but we're primarily focusing on the scientific paper itself. It's called Later Eating Timing in Relation to an Individual Internal Clock is Associated with Lower Insulin Sensitivity and Affected by Genetic Factors, published in eBiomedicine in April 2025 by Jana Valhaus, Professor Olga Pivovarova-Ramick, and their team. So get ready, because this deep dive, I think, is going to offer a fresh perspective on your daily eating rhythm.
Definitely. And to truly grasp the significance of this research, we need to begin with a fundamental concept: our body's internal timekeepers. Our bodies aren't just a collection of organs. They operate on a highly sophisticated 24-hour time control system known as the circadian system. Think of it as an intricate internal network, with a master clock in our brain and smaller peripheral clocks in various organs like your liver and pancreas. These clocks work in harmony, regulating everything from when you feel sleepy to, crucially, how your metabolism functions.
Okay, so it's not just a general sense of time, right? It's more precise. Because of these internal clocks, our metabolic processes aren't static throughout the day. Is that it?
Exactly. They naturally adapt and differ between morning and evening. This means your body responds to and processes glucose and hormones very differently after a meal at noon compared to, say, after a meal at 10 at night. It's a natural daily fluctuation that directly shapes your metabolic responses.
That's fascinating. And how does food fit into this picture?
Well, what's particularly interesting is how deeply intertwined food is with this system. Food intake itself isn't just fuel. It acts as a crucial signal, a kind of timer, that helps synchronize these internal clocks. When your meal times become inconsistent or, out of sync with your natural light-dark rhythm, maybe you work night shifts or your eating patterns are simply irregular, it can actually disrupt these finely tuned internal clocks.
And that disruption has consequences.
Yes, and we already have some idea about that from prior research. This kind of desynchronization, especially consistently eating late into the night, is linked to an increased risk of issues like obesity and cardiovascular diseases.
Okay, so understanding that foundational link, let's dive into what this new research from the German Institute of Human Nutrition Potsdam-Rebruck, led by Professor Olga Remic, aimed to uncover. They specifically wanted to investigate how eating timing affects glucose metabolism and, importantly, the extent to which our genetics influence these patterns. They were truly looking to fill a gap in our knowledge about why we eat when we do and the health ramifications, right?
Precisely. They did this through a robust study known as the Nutrigenomic Analysis in Twins, or NUGAT study. It was actually initiated and designed by Professor Andreas F.H. Pfeiffer. The methodology was, quite insightful for a study of this nature. They recruited 92 adult twin pairs, both identical and fraternal, between 2009 and 2010.
Twins. Why twins? Is that for the genetic angle?
Exactly. The brilliance of including twins is that it allows researchers to tease apart genetic influences from environmental ones. It provides a much clearer picture of what aspects of our eating habits might be passed down through our genes versus what's shaped by our lifestyle or surroundings.
Got it. And the data they gathered sounds incredibly detailed.
It really was. Participants underwent thorough health assessments, physical exams, medical history, body measurements like body mass index and waist circumference, and crucially, a standardized oral glucose tolerance test.
Ah, the sugar test. That tells you how well your body handles sugar.
That's right. It directly measures how efficiently a person's body processes sugar, offering a direct snapshot of their glucose metabolism.
Okay, what else did they look at?
They also meticulously assessed each participant's individual chronotype using a questionnaire. This is basically figuring out whether someone is a natural early riser, a lark, or more of a night owl.
Why is that important?
Understanding each person's unique biological daily rhythm is crucial because it allowed the researchers to personalize the timing data. They moved beyond just a clock on the wall. They could see when someone ate relative to their own internal biological day. It adds a whole layer of precision.
Wow. Okay. And you mentioned food logs.
Yes, and here's a detail that really speaks to the rigor of this research. All participants painstakingly filled out handwritten food logs for 5 consecutive days. They recorded the exact start and end of every eating event, the amount, and the type of food. And this included both working days and days off, ensuring they captured a truly comprehensive picture of their habitual eating patterns, not just, a single-day snapshot.
5 days of detailed logs.
Yeah.
That's commitment.
It is. And with all this rich data, the researchers calculated a sophisticated measurement they termed the circadian time of caloric midpoint. Now, this isn't simply the clock time, like saying 3 p.m. Instead, it represents how late in their personal biological day someone consumed 50% of their daily calories. And it's relative to their individual internal clock, which was marked by the midpoint of their sleep.
So it's tailored to each person's internal schedule.
Precisely. This personalized approach is considered state-of-the-art in what's known as chrononutritional research, the study of how eating times affect our health. It provides a much more accurate insight into a person's unique eating rhythm.
Okay, so after gathering and analyzing all this incredibly precise data, what were the big takeaways? What did they actually find?
This is where it gets really interesting for everyday life. The study found very strong and consistent associations, particularly for that circadian time of caloric midpoint.
Yeah.
Essentially, when you eat, your main calories matters. And it seemed to matter significantly for your metabolic health. Well, a later circadian time of caloric midpoint was robustly associated with poorer insulin sensitivity. This means that when individuals consumed half of their daily calories later in their biological day, their body's cells were less responsive to insulin.
Meaning their bodies had to work harder to manage blood sugar.
Exactly. Their pancreas had to produce more insulin just to manage blood sugar effectively. It was a clear sign that their bodies were struggling more to process sugar efficiently later in their personal day.
And was it just insulin sensitivity, or were there other links?
No, it wasn't just that. They also found that a later caloric midpoint was linked to higher fasting insulin levels, which can be an early indicator of metabolic stress. What's perhaps even more compelling is that these associations remained significant even after the researchers accounted for other factors that could influence metabolism, things like sex, age, total daily energy intake, and even sleep duration.
Wow, so it wasn't just because they were eating more overall or sleeping less. The timing itself seems to be a factor.
That's what the data strongly suggests. It really points to a direct link between the timing of your calorie intake relative to your internal clock and your metabolic health. This study also observed connections between a later circadian time of caloric midpoint and higher body mass index and waist circumference, which, aligns with other research on metabolic health.
What about the timing of the last meal? Did that matter as much?
That's an interesting point. Initially, the circadian time of the last eating event showed similar associations, but these became less significant after all the adjustments were made. It suggests that maybe the overall pattern, represented by that caloric midpoint, might be an even more powerful predictor than just the time of the very last bite.
And did they look at the eating window, like how many hours people spend eating each day? I hear a lot about that.
They did look at that, the duration of the eating window. And quite remarkably, in this particular study, they found no significant correlation between that duration and glucose or obesity-related traits. Now, this particular finding stands in contrast to some other research on time-restricted eating, which really highlights the complexity and the nuances in this field. It's not always straightforward.
Okay, that's really interesting. But this study didn't just stop at when we eat. You mentioned genetics earlier.
Yes, exactly. This research peeled back another fascinating layer. How much of our eating patterns might actually be influenced by our DNA? They explored the genetic contribution, the heritability of these eating time patterns. Heritability basically tells us how much of the variation in a trait within a population is due to genetic factors.
So how much of our eating timing is potentially inherited?
Well, they found that components of eating timing showed high or moderate heritability. For instance, some aspects, like the circadian time of the first eating event, meaning how early or late you naturally start eating relative to your biological clock, showed quite high heritability, over 59%. Similarly, the percentage of energy you consume in your last meal and the total number of eating events per day also showed heritability over 50%.
That's quite high. So when we start eating might be strongly influenced by our genes.
It seems that way, according to this study. But what about that crucial circadian time of the caloric midpoint we just discussed? That showed moderate heritability around 34%. And the circadian time of the last eating event also showed moderate heritability, around 29%.
Okay, moderate heritability. What does that distinction between high and moderate mean practically? Can we change these things?
That's a key insight for practical application, really. It implies that our individual eating timing patterns are, to a notable extent, influenced by our genes. Therefore, modifying patterns that are highly heritable, like maybe when you first feel hungry in the morning, might be more challenging due to these strong genetic predispositions.
But the caloric midpoint and last meal timing.
Exactly. The study noted that shifting the caloric midpoint and the timing of the last food intake to earlier in the day might actually be more feasible, precisely because these specific aspects showed lower or moderate heritability. This kind of aligns with other research suggesting that modifying evening behaviors might be more successful and perhaps offer more flexibility than trying to fight a strong morning urge, for example.
That makes a lot of sense. So pulling all these fascinating insights together, what does this truly mean for you listening right now?
Well, the findings from this study, combined with existing research, strongly suggest that strategies focused on eating timing hold significant potential. Potential for both preventing and perhaps even managing conditions like type 2 diabetes.
So the core message is eat earlier.
Essentially, yes. Consciously shifting your main calorie intake to earlier circadian times in your day may significantly improve your glucose metabolism and offer genuine protection against diabetes. This is strongly supported by the finding that individuals who consume most of their calories earlier in their personal biological day tend to have better glucose tolerance.
And it's personalized, right? Not just a strict clock time.
Absolutely. The researchers, including Professor Olga Pivovarova-Ramich, truly emphasize the importance of aligning your main calorie intake to an earlier time in relation to your individual biological clocks. It isn't a rigid one-size-fits-all rule like everyone must eat dinner by 6 p.m. It's about understanding your own rhythm. What's late for an early bird might be perfectly fine, or even early for a night owl relative to their internal clock.
Okay, that personalization is key. Now, as with any study, there are usually limitations to consider. Did the researchers note any?
Yes, and it's important to acknowledge them to understand the full picture. They were very transparent about this. One key factor is that both the food and sleep timing data were self-reported.
So people had to remember and write it down themselves.
Exactly. And that means the data could be prone to measurement errors because, let's be honest, it can be tricky to precisely remember and log every single thing you eat and exactly when you eat it. Future studies, as the researchers suggest, would certainly benefit from more objective monitoring, maybe using wearable devices or apps that track things more automatically.
Makes sense. What about the people in this study?
That's another point. The participants were generally young, lean, and without significant existing metabolic disturbances. While this makes the findings highly relevant for preventive measures in otherwise healthy individuals, these results ideally need to be confirmed in larger and more diverse populations, including people who may already have metabolic conditions, older adults, different ethnic groups, and so on.
And the number of people? 92 pairs, is that enough?
It's a reasonable size for a twin study, which are often complex to run, but 92 individuals overall is still relatively small in the grand scheme of population health. So yes, the results definitely should be validated in larger groups to strengthen their generalizability.
Right. So more research is needed, as always.
Yes, and the researchers themselves are calling for that. They advocate for further validation studies and robust clinical trials. These would truly explore the effectiveness and real-world feasibility of these eating timing-based interventions, especially considering those genetic influences we talked about. They also highlight the crucial need to further differentiate what aspects of our eating patterns are truly modifiable versus those that are more hardwired.
Knowing what we can realistically change is pretty important for advice.
Absolutely. Knowing what we can change and where our natural tendencies lie is key to developing truly effective and sustainable strategies for health. The interplay between our genetics, our internal clocks, and our daily eating habits is complex, but studies like this are meticulously peeling back the layers, giving us increasingly actionable insights.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener, as you move through your daily rhythm?
I think it's a powerful reminder that your body's internal clocks are intimately connected to your metabolism, really connected, and that when you eat can be every bit as crucial as what you eat.
So that timing piece is really worth paying attention to.
It seems so. Shifting your main calorie intake earlier in your personal biological day could be a simple, yet potentially profoundly powerful protective strategy for your long-term metabolic health.
Yeah, this deep dive really raises an important question, doesn't it? In a world where, late night meals, evening snacks, irregular schedules are just increasingly common, how much is our modern lifestyle working against our ancient, deeply ingrained internal rhythms?
It's a critical question.
Yeah.
Perhaps it's time for all of us to consider not just our nutrition, but our chrononutrition, as the field calls it.
Chrononutrition. So think about your own schedule. Are your meals aligned with your natural biological clock, your energy peaks and dips? Could a subtle shift in your eating timing, maybe moving that big dinner a bit earlier, or having a more substantial breakfast make a significant difference to your long-term health? Based on this research, it's certainly something worth exploring further for yourself.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.